Welcome to the Power of Your Mind podcast. I'm Victoria Gallagher, your host. Have you been attempting to use law of attraction or hypnosis to attract financial abundance, a soulmate, or career success? Would you like to be happy, motivated, and successful? Have better health, enjoy more fulfilling relationships, overcome struggle, and gain mastery over your life? Then join me on this amazing self-help podcast where you'll unleash the power of your mind. I'll be sharing 20 years of wisdom and techniques of hypnotherapy, law of attraction, visualization, meditation, personal growth, positive affirmations, and other effective methods to help you tap into the great power which resides in your mind and become the best version of yourself. So hello and welcome to today's episode of the Power of Your Mind podcast. You are listening to episode number 73. I'm Victoria Gallagher, Law of Attraction coach and #1 best-selling author of Practical Law of Attraction, Align Yourself with the Manifesting Conditions and Successfully Attract Your Desires. I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist, founder of HipTalk.com and HypnoCloud apps. So be sure to stop by HipTalk.com and sign up for your free self-hypnosis video training course. And for our listeners who found us through Power of Your Mind podcast, you can get 35% off your first order of hypnosis downloads when you apply the code podcast to your shopping cart. Also, be sure to watch for and download our latest HypnoCloud app in the iTunes store. So today I have a very special guest with me, Brad Warner. Brad Warner is the author of Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen and numerous other titles, including It Came From Beyond Zen, Don't Be a Jerk, and Hardcore Zen, a Soto Zen teacher. He is also a punk bassist, filmmaker, and popular blogger who leads workshops and retreats all around the world. In addition to his books, his writing appears in Lion's Roar, Tricycle Buddha Dharma, and Alternative Press. He lives in Los Angeles, where he is the founder and lead teacher of the Angel City Zen Center. Visit him online at hardcorezen.info. Today, Brad is going to share some of his insights about Zen 101 and Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen. So welcome to the show, Brad.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. And this is a really interesting topic, Zen and Letters to a Dead Friend.
Well, thanks.
Congratulations on all of your books and your touring, and that's really super exciting.
Yeah, I do a bunch of that, so it's become my kind of way of life now. But
that's cool. How long ago did you start this process?
Well, the Zen process has been a long time. I started when I was a student at Kent State University in Ohio. In the early 80s, and I have continued ever since. I moved to Japan in 1993,
oh, wow.
And so I had a teacher in the United States, a Zen teacher in the United States, and then I've had another Zen teacher in Japan who was the one who ordained me, and then I came back here, and now it's all this.
Oh, wow, that's very cool. So the title, Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen, is pretty straightforward, but can you tell us a little bit more about what the book is about?
Yeah, the title wasn't my first choice, but that was the subtitle. I originally wanted to call it Carved into the Universe, Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen, but the New World Library liked the subtitle better than the title that I picked up, or that I came up with. And the story is, I think it's my 8th book about Zen, and I had thought that I should do a real basic sort of book about Zen. This is where you mentioned the Zen 101. That was a working title of this book, about sort of basic stuff about Zen, to kind of get right back to the roots of it. But when I wrote that, I wasn't getting very far. I just couldn't. It was the book itself was boring to me as the author, and I didn't want to continue. And something had happened in 2014. I was traveling through Europe, and two friends of mine back home in the United States, both people I'd known since high school, were dying of cancer at the time that I was doing this tour. So it was hard, and one of them especially I was in contact with throughout the tour. And the day that I got word that he died, I kept a diary. I do this every time I tour, and I wrote this entry in the diary that read sort of like a letter to my now deceased friend, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. But when I got stuck on the book, I started looking through my old diaries to see if I could get some sort of inspiration there. And I came across this, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. What if I write, instead of writing a sort of generic Zen 101 book, I'll write all the things that I wish I had been able to talk to my friend about? Because if you're me and you do a practice like this, I have a lot of friends, like you mentioned, being a punk rock bass player. I have a lot of friends who I've known for years who are not part of the whole meditation thing and have no connection with it at all, and who see me as something completely different from how readers of my books see me. And I thought one way to sort of approach that sort of an audience, because I know there's a lot of people out there like that, is to write it in the form of these letters to my friend. And I kind of created a composite of the two people who died, along with a few other people, because I thought writing to a specific person was a little bit, it just seemed like it wasn't working for me to write to one of my specific friends and to call him by his name. So I made this kind of composite character that I called Marky, and I just continued in that vein, and the whole project sort of came to life. But I really tried, as I was writing the letters, to write them exactly as if I was writing a letter that one of my now deceased friends could actually read, And then I went back and kind of edited them and made them more book-like after I'd finished doing that. But so having that focus really helped make it more real.
And that's very interesting. And I think that helps to capture the reader's attention a little better, because it's, sometimes, the 101 type books, it can get a little bit too textbook and boring, like you were saying. And this kind of gives it just adds a different dimension to it.
Yeah, having a person to focus on really helped. And somebody brought something up during a lecture I'd given, because what I'm doing now is I'm doing a podcast based on the book, where I'm writing further letters, to the same composite dead friend. Oh, we're having fires out here in Los Angeles. I don't know if you can hear the sirens going by. I think that's more of that stuff.
Oh no!
But
yeah,
that's pretty crazy. But so I. As I'm continuing talking about this to audiences, somebody brought up the fact that a lot of the Buddhist literature is it's kind of a form of fiction. People understand this in the Buddhist world, that a lot of the literature that's attributed to Buddha, it wasn't actually written by Buddha, or is supposedly it's often written as conversations between Buddha and some person.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you say conversations, because I was literally going to say, this is, in a way, it kind of sounds a little bit like the same concept as, like Conversations with God. Have you read any of that material?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I haven't read the whole book, but yeah, it is similar, except I'm not, it's a kind of a one-sided conversation in that I'm just kind of putting it out there. But yeah, it's a similar concept or similar way.
Cool. So who was the real Marky Moon, and what kind of relationship did you have with him?
Well, the people I was writing about, one of them was the drummer for the first band I ever had back in high school, the first sort of punk rock band I ever put together. And the other one was a guy who had also known in high school. We were never in a band together, but we shared a house together as starving musicians often do. And we were both in bands that sort of played with each other, in shows and things. And so they were both people who I knew for a long time, but who had no relationship, as I said, to the whole Zen work I'd done. They were both the same age, 2 years younger than I was. So they were also kind of in high school. You have those relationships where 2 years makes a huge difference when you're in high school. And then if the relationship continues, you always sort of continue to be the older person, but it's not quite the same anymore once you're much older. So it was, especially with one of the people, it was a fairly close relationship. I went and visited him 2 times during his illness. Both times he was well enough to, he wasn't like bedridden or anything. He could, but he was mostly housebound. He didn't like to leave the house too long because you'd never know what was going to happen any given day. So we just kind of hung around at his house for a week and just talked and watched videos and did things. But the subject of Zen didn't really come up, or the subject of what that might mean to a person who was dying didn't really come up. And I didn't want to be the last thing I would want if I was dying of cancer is for like some friend of mine to try to push their religion on me. So I wasn't going to do that to him, and I just kind of let the conversation go as it went. And that produced a bit of regret, because I thought, well, maybe if I'd pushed it a little bit more, he might have wanted to talk about those things. So this is sort of a way of dealing with my own guilt over that, I suppose, in a certain sense.
Yeah, I can imagine that was probably healing for you to be able to write those things to him that you never really got a chance to say.
Yeah, that's it. And I don't know if saying this stuff would have made a difference to him or not. Zen is a practice, and it's something you have to kind of take on in the long term. So just sort of hearing a bunch of stuff about it, all at once as a kind of data download or something like that, I don't know how much good that does to a person, but it would have been interesting if he'd kind of followed along. I always think there's a lot of people I know in my life who could have benefited from the practice that I took up, but they probably wouldn't have gotten into it because the same reasons that I would have been reluctant or was reluctant to get into it, because it just seems kind of weird. And
yeah. If you had it to do all over again, would you have still gone the same direction, or do you think you would have pressed it? Or
I don't know. I probably, partially I sort of wish I'd pressed it, but on the other hand, I don't know if I would do it differently. I think there's a kind of a standard in Zen in that you don't ever proselytize. You don't try to sell Zen to somebody. And there's even a little, it's not exactly a rule, but it's a sort of a piece of advice that says, don't answer a question about Zen until the person who's asking the question asks the question 3 times. Which is you're not supposed to take that literally, but it's a sort of a measure of you don't want to just have an idle chat about it. I mean, you can if you want, but that doesn't really lead to anything. It really has to kind of come from a genuine desire to want to know about
it kind of reminds me of the expression, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And so that readiness maybe comes from asking that question multiple times.
Yeah, it really does. And the readiness is a big part of it. There's this whole idea of, they call it way-seeking mind sometimes in English, and I kind of avoid those sort of goofy sounding terms, but it's this idea of having that aspiration or that interest, the deep interest in finding out the big questions of life. And if you don't have a big interest in finding out those questions, then then you're only going to go as far as you want to go, so if you're
right. So it sounds like it's wanting that sincere desire, not just some mild curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have conversations. I lived in Japan for a long time, and one funny thing that sort of surprised me about Japanese people is I would say the average person in the United States who is interested in Buddhism probably knows more about Buddhism than the average Japanese person who just kind of lived with it their whole lives. So I would get asked questions by Japanese people about Buddhism all the time. And I always kind of tried to, coworkers. I worked for a film production company over there, and I'd always kind of be like, I'd give them these sort of half answers to see if they really wanted more,
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it went somewhere, and sometimes it was just like, oh, you just wanted to chat about something, which is fine, I can do that too, but it's not going to go, it's not going to go anywhere really.
Interesting. So in one of the letters, you mentioned truth versus Buddhism. Truth versus Buddhism. So what exactly does that mean?
Well, I was kind of thinking about it, and because I have this sort of platform now, and a lot of sort of Buddhists pay attention to me, and that's fine, but I find that I'm sort of, I don't have that much patience with the Buddhists who listen to what I say, because they kind of want you to be part of the team, the part of the religion or something. And I think I got into Buddhism because I didn't get into Buddhism because I was interested in Buddhism. And in fact, when I took, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I got interested in it because I took a class on it at Kent State University. And I took that class because I was interested in like the meaning of life, like I was taking philosophy classes and any other kind of thing. And Zen Buddhism was just one more thing. So I didn't come into it having a particular interest in Buddhism. I had an interest in the truth. And I think I've maintained that throughout. So I practice Zen Buddhism, I mean, that's what they call it, because I find it to be a really useful way to get into this aspect of what is truth, what is the sort of deeper truth about life. But if it came up that there was something else that would do it better, I'd probably drop the Zen. I mean, I'm not that committed to Zen as a thing, as a religion, as a convert to a religion or anything like that. I'm more interested in what's really true. And, after 30 some years of working with it, I haven't found anything that I think is better, at least for me. So I keep on that path, but the real meat of the thing is the truth, and not the Buddhism.
So it's really a mechanism to find the truth.
Well, yeah, it's a method, I would say. I mean, the Zazen, the kind of meditation that I do, is the version that I do. It's the guy that developed it or brought it to Japan called it shikantaza, which means just sitting. And so it's a meditation in most forms of meditation have an object, something that you want to get. You want to get enlightenment or bliss or become more mindful, or, there's all sorts of things people want. And when you're doing the shikantaza practice, you're supposed to put all of that aside. You're not even trying to do anything except sit, and you're sitting in a very specific way. So it's not just, you're not just kind of lounging around on your easy chair or something like that.
How do you sit for this?
Well, the sort of classic posture is the lotus posture, but it really doesn't matter what you do with your legs. That's the hardest part of the lotus posture for most people. So you can kind of put your legs in a different way, but I'm sort of trying to do it as I'm sitting on this chair right here talking to you. But
so your spine is straight.
Yeah, your spine is straight, and you're trying to find that kind of balance point where your spine is. The lotus posture is a really good way to do this, and that's why it's so popular. But you're trying to find a balance point where your spine is sort of resting on top of your hips. Kind of one teacher I heard, not my teacher, but some other teacher I heard talking about it, sort of likened it to if you took a pencil and you put it on your hand and you try to find just the spot where the pencil will will stand up on your hand, which is very difficult to do if you've ever
Yes.
tried it. But you can do it if you find just the right spot. And that's what you're sort of aiming for in Zazen, is to try to find that spot where the spine is just holding itself, and you're not really putting any effort into it. And so as you're sitting, you're constantly trying to keep that position, but you're not trying to do anything else. You're not trying to go into the sphere of nothingness with your mind or anything. You're just trying to sit.
Now, does the sitting then become the focal point of the meditation, or is there's no focal point at all? If you find value in this personal growth related material, I strongly recommend that you sign up for your $1 trial to my Personal Growth Club. Just head on over to personalgrowthclub.com and get a whole month of premium Personal Growth Club video training materials, meditations. You also get 6 free hypnosis sessions that are valued at over $174, all for this trial of just $1. Even if you cancel, you can keep the 6 hypnosis sessions. That's my gift to you, and that's how confident I am that you are going to love Personal Growth Club. Go to personalgrowthclub.com and start your $1 1-month trial today.
Well, yeah, that's it. I mean, there is no focal point at all, which is I think the most difficult thing for anybody, and I include myself in the anybody definition to do, because you're always trying to get somewhere. Life is sort of, I think most of us Western people or Eastern people, you have this kind of idea that you're doing something now for something to happen in the future. You make the pancakes. You pour the batter in order to eat the pancakes later. And I'm saying that because I just had pancakes. But so every action is sort of, you have a tendency, we all do, to view it in those terms. And what we're trying to do in this practice is get out of that, just get out of that, of having any intention. My teacher was big on using that word intention and saying that Zazen is a state without intention.
The lack of intention. He
got in a huge argument with one of his longtime students that I was there to witness about whether Zazen was the state without intention or not. And my teacher would not budge. He said, it's absolutely the state without intention.
Yes. And yet, you could say you have an intention to have no intention.
Well, yeah. And that's it. And one of the things people do, and I know you're not doing it now, but a lot of people use statements like that when they hear me or other people who talk about this practice and say, I got you now. You're trying not to try is still trying. But one of my teachers answered that brilliantly. Tim McCarthy, my first teacher, somebody said that to him, and he said, well, semantically, that's true. If you're just diagramming a sentence, then the intention to have no intention is still an intention. But when you're actually in the midst of doing it, you can see that that's a very, very different thing from having an intention. The intention to get rid of intentions is different from all the other kind of intentions you might come up with.
Yeah, I can see the distinction between the no intention and an intention to have no intention. I can definitely see that. I mean, probably at some, like if you are saying, okay, well, today I'm going to do my, how do you pronounce it again?
Zazen.
Today I'm going to do my Zaza meditation at 3:00.
Yeah.
When you said that, you had an intention to go and do that meditation, but then when you're actually in the practice of it, then there's no intention.
Yeah, so when you're doing Zazen, there's no, well, you might have an intention. You might, everybody who starts doing Zazen or who starts doing any sort of meditation practice, they want something. And again, that's me all over the place. I was a university student and I wanted to kind of deal with the pressures and things of being a young person and having to deal with what one has to deal with in early adulthood and all that. But beyond that, there's a certain kind of a sense of when you're in the middle of it, you're letting all of that go, and that's real different. Whatever the intention is, whatever intention comes up, the instruction is always to just
let that go.
Let it go. It's
Is
there.
there something that you do to, when you notice, because like, okay, so I've done a lot of Vipassana meditation. I'm not sure. If, you know, so with that, you do have an intention of, you do have a focal point, which is, respiration.
Mm-hmm.
And so, during that process, you just basically calmly bring your mind back to the moment. So when you're doing your meditation, like, how do you get yourself back to that non-intention?
Well, it's a good question, and it's a kind of a hard question. My ordaining teacher's standard answer was just bring yourself back to the posture. So he was all about posture. Mm-hmm. My first teacher was a little bit more liberal, is the word. He was sort of gave you a few more options, and one of them was breathing. Mm-hmm. Because he had studied, my ordaining teacher was Japanese, and he'd only ever done Zen meditation. My first teacher had gone through a process like a lot of Western people do, where he'd done a few other things before settling on Zazen. So he was open to the idea of breath as a thing that you focus on. And focusing on the breath is a real good one, because it kind of breath is very regular. As long as you're alive, you're going to be breathing. So it's a very dependable sort of thing to look at. And it works out pretty well. Interesting.
So in another chapter of your book, you call that "I'm Just a Zen Bozo." Yeah. So what is a Zen Bozo?
Well, that was a joke on my part, and it's because sometimes they call what I am a monk, and sometimes they call what I am a priest, but both of those come from the Catholic tradition, and I don't feel like I'm a monk or a priest. That those aren't really valid. And in Japanese, the word for what I became when I got ordained is bozu. And bozu sounds an awful lot like bozo, So I so I was writing a letter about that process, to my friend, about becoming a bozu, and then I said I sometimes feel like a bozo for doing what I do, because it's sort of I don't feel foolish about it, but I feel like it's such a weird thing, and when I'm talking to sort of people who don't have a connection to that world about it, it's sometimes I feel like I must just sound like a crazy person to whoever it is, and that's a lot of the process of writing this book the way I did, because I'm kind of opening up myself to like, yeah, this is somebody who probably thinks what I'm doing is crazy, a little bozo-ish.
Now, how long do you sit typically in meditation? How often do you do it?
Well, I do it every day. This morning I didn't, because it was Halloween last night and I got up very late this morning. But generally on most days when something like that isn't happening, I get up, and the first thing I do is I have a cushion that's near my bed, and I go sit on it. And the normal term of Zazen, well, depending on what tradition you follow, is 25 minutes, 30 minutes, or 40 minutes. So I usually, just pick one of those numbers. So it's about half an hour, more or less. In the ancient times, one thing I noticed when I lived in Japan is they have these sticks of incense you can buy anywhere called mainichiko, which means everyday scent. Ooh. And then the most common form of incense. And I noticed, because I would use them when I was sitting, that they burn for almost exactly 32 or 33 minutes, just over half an hour.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, and I assume that they're cut to the length that they are, because the meditators would use that to time their meditation before there were clocks and things to look at. So it's about the time it takes for one of these incense sticks to burn. Of course, the incense sticks you get most of the time in the U.S. are the Indian ones, so they're much longer.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't recommend using one of those to time your zazen, because you'd be sitting.
You'll be there for a few hours.
Yeah, you'd be there for a few hours, and you don't want to do that.
Oh, that's very cool. So, what are some of the benefits that you get from practicing this meditation, this way of life?
It's a good question, and it's always a hard one to answer, because Generally, the Zen way of doing things and of explaining itself avoids mentioning any sort of benefits. That my ordaining teacher in Japan's teacher had this famous saying, which was, Zen is good for nothing. Which is a tough sell, you know.
Yeah.
It's tough to get somebody interested.
You're not selling me on this here.
No. And that's the thing. You kind of avoid having any idea of the benefits. But of course, I wouldn't have been doing this for 30 years if it wasn't doing something for me. And I guess, you know, initially, when I was a university student and a punk bass player and having all those troubles, the reason I did it more than any other was just because my mind was so buzzy and fuzzy and like that all the time. And I found that it really helped with that. Mm-hmm. You know, and I gave up sitting because I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't terribly committed to like, I want to be a Buddhist. So, you know, I would sit for a few months and then be like, okay, I'm going to not do this anymore. And every time I stopped doing it, the fuzziness and buzziness of my brain just came right back to the level it had been before. And I'm going, well, I guess I got to do this Zazen. So that was the first benefit, was that it was just a little bit less noise and garbage going on in my head, because it's sort of, as you're sitting there throwing all the things that your mind gives to you away, that gets you into a kind of a habit. To where if you're just on an ordinary day and something comes up, you just easily go, okay, I'm not going to deal with that, you know, and so all these random things that I think most people's heads are full of are if you do this practice, you're just kind of going, whatever. You just, even if they seem very important, you realize, I can't do anything about that, and you just drop it for the moment. So that really helped, you know, and after a while you get into sort of more cosmic and mysterious aspects of it, but that takes a few years to get into, and for most people just starting out, it's not all that relevant. But I suppose it is relevant in terms of knowing that if you work this practice for a few years, there are things that you'll discover about yourself that are always surprising. I've never met anybody who failed to be surprised at their own capacities and their own the depth of their own stupidity and so forth. You know, you just kind of find a lot out. And then one of the things I noticed was that the similarity between me and everyone else, you know, I sort of liked to think of myself as an individualist and very unique. And if you look at my trajectory in life, it's fairly uncommon. But then I realized, I'm deeply similar to everyone. And that was a kind of a shocker, you know, for somebody who was very into the fact that he was different from everybody else, to find out that, no, I'm pretty much the same.
Yeah. It sounds like it's really good for just letting go of our attachments, because even that uniqueness that we all think, I'm so special, I'm important, I'm different, all of that, we're really attached to our identity. And so it sounds like it's really good for just like detaching from all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's an interesting point, and it's definitely true, because you are kind of, not you personally, but everybody's sort of fixed on their identity and their ego structure and all of that. And something I just found out like fairly recently, a few months ago, somebody pointed out that the word in Sanskrit that's usually translated as attachment, that's very commonly translated that way, is actually also means fuel. And it's a kind of a weird, you know, how some words in different languages are related to words that you'd be surprised that they're related to, and that word is also the word for fuel. And there's some thought, and I think this is really right on the money, that what the originators of this practice was talking about was not so much attachment in the way that we think of the word attachment, but fuel, meaning adding fuel to all the stuff that's already going on in your mind. And what you're trying to do in this practice is not so much to stop those processes that are going on in your mind as to avoid adding more stuff to it. And that's something I found I was doing all along, because if you want to get through a sesshin, like a long form where you're doing meditation, you're doing zazen for, several days at a time or something like that, you have to do that or you'll go crazy. You have to just stop adding more anger to the anger that's already there, or more frustration to the frustration that's already there, or whatever it is.
Right.
You have to just stop that, or you're not going to get through the next half hour of sitting and staring at a wall.
You know what came up for me is when you said that, is not adding more meaning to it. Not adding more meaning, because the meaning that we give are those whatever's there, adding more meaning to it is what fuels the emotion and the attachment to it. And if you're looking for truth, the less we are adding our own meaning to something, the easier we're uncovering that truth, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that meaning is kind of a thing, because it's sort of like if you're angry, what I noticed is I tend to try to find more reasons to be angry, and you do this for positive emotions too. If you're happy, you try to find more reasons to be happy, and we all love that process, but we don't like the other. And the sort of thing you get into with the Zen is you realize, you just have to stop doing that, and just let the happiness that you have be the happiness that you have, and let the anger that you have be the anger that you have, and they'll all pass at some point.
Yeah.
But what you reach, sometimes when I explain it that way, people think, you're just going to reach this like dull, sad point. But actually the set point that you end up at, if you do that, or at least my experience has been, it's been much better than the usual, so you actually go, I'm actually happier now, even though I'm not trying to draw more happiness into my happiness. I'm also not trying to draw more sadness into my sadness, or more anger into my anger. So you kind of reach this level where you go, okay, life is kind of good. It's okay. I'm alive and I'm here and I can feel things.
Hello, this is Victoria Gallagher. I hope you're enjoying listening to the Power of Your Mind podcast. As a way of thanking you for listening, I'd like to offer you a one-time discount of 35% off your first order at hiptalk.com. Just go to hiptalk.com and enter the code PODCAST in the discount code area in your cart, and you'll receive 35% off your first order. Thank you so much for listening to the Power of Your Mind podcast. Yeah, that makes sense. Like the layer that is the closest to who we are is the truth of us is bliss and happiness. Even though, we live in this dualistic universe where we do have to experience. I don't know what your take is on, if we are supposed to experience some suffering, or if we need to have, balance the happiness with suffering. I don't know if that's part of your.
No, it is actually. I think balance is really, my teacher he used that word balance a lot, and he would mean balance in the physical sense, like I mentioned about the posture, finding that balanced state, but that balanced state also provides a more emotional balance. And yeah, there's always going to be good and bad in life, but a lot of the good and bad is more a matter of judgment than anything else. Things just happen as they happen, and then we decide if we like them or not. And whether we like them or not is kind of irrelevant. I found that I can find a way to enjoy just about anything, which was surprising. My favorite story to tell about that is when I went into the hospital for kidney stones, and kidney stones are terribly painful. But I was like trying to use that Zen mindset even then, and going, well, there's something I can, this pain is incredibly painful, but it's also this very interesting experience. You're going, wow, that is a lot of pain.
Well, rather than resisting it, you're observing it. and noticing that, and it's because we are really quick, like you said, to judge and discern and make something up about it. I mean, even if just genuinely, there's been times where I've felt sad and I didn't know why. And I'm thinking, well, was it because of this, or could it be because of that? And your mind just generally has to gravitate towards some answer. And I think, what this is, the Zen, this process and the meditation kind of helps us to just let go of all that. And I think if you let go of the meaning of that, you're going to experience it for a lot less time.
Yeah. And what you're saying kind of brings up, because depression has been one of the things that I've worked with, that's, I don't want to say suffered from, because that sounds too awful, but that's one of the things that I got into this practice for, because I would go through these bouts of depression, which like you're describing, they just sort of seem to come on for no apparent reason. And the habitual way I dealt with that is to try to figure out what the reason was, which means you're just bringing to mind all the depressing things in your life, which means you just become more depressed. Yes. And I found that a better strategy for it was to just go, oh, there's that depression again. I'm just going to wait it out, and that actually works really well. And it still happens, not as frequently as it used to, but it'll just be walking down the street, one day, and it'll just be like, blah, the depression. And rather than trying to figure it out, I just go, okay, I treat it like if I had a cold or something, I'm like, well, I'll just rest a while and wait for this to pass. And
it makes a lot of sense. I mean, just, from a law of attraction standpoint, whatever you focus on expands, and you get more of whatever you're focused on. So if you're sitting there just like, well, why am I feeling like this? You're going to get more of feeling like this, and you're going to, and that reason just validates that you should be feeling like this for a reason.
Yeah, and it just goes on. And anger does the same thing. You just get more and more angry, about what you're angry about, or things you weren't even angry about before you started thinking about them. And that's an interesting way to put it. What you focus on is just going to expand, and I think that's true.
Yeah. So what would you say is the future of Zen in the West as you see it?
I'm laughing because there's sort of, I think mostly, I think it's going to be good, but I think when I get into the minutiae, as I sometimes do, being involved in some of the Zen stuff that's going on, I go, oh my God, these people are going the wrong way with this. So I'm of two minds, because I do think that it's gonna become a bigger thing in our society. Buddhism is interesting because it's growing in popularity, but it's still really, really tiny in terms of people who actually practice. I was just looking up some statistics, and people, let's see, in the United States, the largest percentage of Buddhists, people who call themselves Buddhists, are in Hawaii with 8%. And then the next largest is California with 2, so it goes down to 2. And then the rest of the country, state by state, is either 1% or below. Mm-hmm. So it's a very minor thing, but it's getting a lot of press. So it's interesting to see where it goes, because there's a lot of people who think they know what Zen is all about, and your cat just walked by. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who think they know what Zen is about, and I even
he thinks he knows what Zen is all about.
He probably does. Yeah, but so there's something I brought up in the book about the Urban Dictionary definition of Zen, which you can find online, which means sort of chill and whatever. And there's a lot of people who think they know about it, and it's sort of, there's a sort of ascending hierarchy of people who think they know what Zen is all about. But the thing is, if you actually do the practice, one of the ironic things is it's less and less you know what it's about. You're like, I was just going to
say, it's got to be one of those things where, like, the more you know about it, or the more you experience it, the more you realize, like, you don't know anything.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I've been doing this very intensely for 30 odd years, and I'm to the point where, like, I don't know, and I'm looking at these people online who are just kind of talking like they've got it all figured out, and I'm going, oh, good for you.
Good for you. You've been doing it a month. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You know everything.
Yeah, that's exactly what I feel like. I'm going, oh, okay, yeah, that's good.
Well, it's similar. It's similar in my world too. The people have maybe seen a particular movie that's out there, think that they know exactly what what law of attraction is all about, and actually, that is just a very microscopic version of what it's all about. So it's it's all of these practices really require deep, thorough experiencing and practicing in order to really have something to talk about and think about.
Yeah, there's so many doors into this, and it's really interesting because I'm probably one of those people who's a little bit like, oh, law of attraction. I'm like, because I've probably seen that same movie you're talking about. But yeah, when you get really deeply into something and find out what it is, and if you're going to be serious about it, often, not every time, but I'd say more often than not, you end up in sort of the same place. If you're going, oh, this is one lens to look through reality at, and if I really, really pay attention to it, if I don't just do it superficially, you're going to come to certain conclusions, and you'll find that those conclusions probably not the right word, because conclusion means concluded, but there's sort of a direction you're going to go, and you go, oh, this is a lot more complicated than I thought it was.
Yes, exactly. So you have a letter called "The Goal of Having No Goals," which that scares the heck out of me because I love having goals. So tell us a little bit about what the deal with being Zen, with Zen being called the goalless practice.
Well, yeah, it's sort of back to what I was mentioning. That goal of no goals is exactly the question that I got asked that sparked my teacher to say, well, it's not the same as the goal of having no goals is not the same as having a goal, And when I was explaining it earlier, I used the word intention, but that's, the goal of Zen practice. There is nothing. There is no goal. And part of what the practice is trying to do is get you out of the mindset that says everything has to have a purpose or a goal or something that it's headed to. As time passes, naturally things will, go in a direction, and expansion is the word you used just now, and so that's the kind of the way it'll go. And you just accept that that's going to happen. But what you need to focus on now, as far as the Zen practice, is just don't worry about it. Just do the practice. And I think in a lot of ways, Zen is very physical. It's people hear the word Zen and imagine it's a mental thing, but it's actually a very physical practice. And it's not physical in the same way as like exercising is, but there are a lot of similarities. So when you're exercising, you might be thinking about taking the weight off or building muscle or whatever, but that's all secondary. You got to do the thing. You got to lift the weights or get on the treadmill or whatever. And in that moment, losing 20 pounds or whatever your goal happens to be is irrelevant. It's irrelevant to what you're doing because you're going to do the same thing anyway. So that's the goal of having no goals. You just do the thing, and what happens as a result of it just has to, work itself out.
Right. So how do you know what to do if you don't have a goal? For example, and I, for the most part, I get what you're saying. Like I get be here, be present, and live in the moment, and you will end up wherever you end up, and it'll be what's right for you. And so I get that, but how do you know what to do in this moment other than, do your meditation, but like, how do you know what's right actions for a person to take?
It's a great question, and it's one of my like FAQs on my blog. I have this little FAQ section, and that's one of the most common questions, is a variation on that. And it took me a while to realize that it was the same question over and over again, which is how do I know if I'm doing this right? Especially if you're saying, well, you're not doing anything. My teacher's answer, the ordaining teacher's answer, was just focus on your posture. Just keep watching your posture, and that's how you know if you're doing it right. If your posture is right, you're doing it right. Even I would go to him sometimes and say, I'm sitting zazen, but I'm thinking about this and that, and he'd just rattle off whatever the things are. And he'd always listen politely until I stopped talking, and then he would just say the same thing every doggone time. Sorry, I'm trying not to swear. Which was, that's just the content of your zazen. Don't tell me that again. but that's what it was. Yeah. So you're doing it right if you're holding the posture. Not holding, it sounds like you're doing something deliberate, but if you're maintaining that balance, you're doing it right. Mm-hmm. And just there aren't a lot of signposts. You can kind of go, oh, it's a little different today from how it was yesterday, and it's definitely different now than from what it was 10 years ago, but right now is not 10 years ago, and right now is not yesterday. So so if you stop comparing now to some other time, then you're doing it right. And if you're still comparing now to some other time, well, you're doing that now. So you're still okay.
Yes. And I always tell people that even with hypnosis or any type of mindfulness technique, or any time you're going into the mind, I mean, the mind is just so vast, and there's so many different experiences and so many different things that could be going on with you, such as, great night's sleep, lousy night's sleep, other things that are going on with you that I don't believe you're ever going to be able to duplicate the same exact mental state that you had yesterday or 10 years ago. It's always going to be something a little different.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and for sure it's never the same, and there's no real way to compare it. You're comparing a memory to a real experience, and a memory and a real experience are vastly different. So if you notice that, you just stop. Well, usually you stop comparing it to your memories, and you just kind of get on with whatever is happening right now.
Or comparing how other people are. I mean, that's like one of the number one questions that, people ask me when they go into hypnosis is like, well, how long should it take for this to work, and all of that. And I mean, there's just like literally no way to answer that question, because I mean, where you're starting is completely different from where somebody else is starting, and where you're going is completely different from where someone else is going. And all the limiting beliefs and everything, that's all the obstacles that are preventing you from being where you want to be, are different for everyone. So there's like no real way to answer that question. But I always do, there's general guidelines and that kind of thing. But, it's kind of the same with any of these mental or physical, and this is more of a physical technique.
It's real similar. My dad was into hypnosis for a while, and he used to tell me some of that stuff about it, and it is interesting because you don't know what it's going to be like for anybody else, and that's one of the reasons we don't. There's this idea of enlightenment, and there's two major schools within Zen, and one of the schools, which is not the one that I studied, they talk about enlightenment all the time, and they'll describe it, and they'll kind of make it an object, a focus, and we don't do that. And one of the reasons is because everybody's experience of it is going to be different. Like Dogen, who founded this sect that I follow, his one of his expressions, or one of his little quotes, is something like, "Nobody ever says this is realization exactly the way I expected it to be." So you can't expect it. It's just going to be whatever it is, and that's what I think what a realization or enlightenment is noticing that, oh my God, this moment is its own unique thing, and it doesn't matter if it's sort of like the thing that I did yesterday. It's still, this this day of waiting for the bus to arrive is totally different from yesterday waiting for the bus to arrive.
That's interesting. It makes a lot of sense. Everything that you're saying makes a lot of sense, and definitely piques some curiosity, and I'm sure among our listeners, of tapping into learning how to do this practice on a daily basis. So what advice would you give somebody who wants to start along this path?
Golly.
And would you even call it a path?
Well, yeah, I mean, the way is usually the way that's expressed, and that the word that's translated as the way is actually the word for street or road. So yeah,
Okay.
It's a path.
Okay.
And I don't know. There's certainly, I've put one on my blog, and there's certainly dozens of these you can find on the internet of how to do Zazen. So you can just start. You can find out how to do Zazen and just start doing it. There's no problem with that. And eventually, after you've done it for a while, the thing you'd want to do is look for a teacher. Dogen is real adamant that you need a teacher at some point in your practice, and because this is a sort of a practice that's done in conjunction with the world. There's a sort of idea sometimes of meditation as being kind of something that hermits do off in the mountain with no other. But that's not the Zen way. The Zen way is to do it in a sort of a community, which is a different sort of thing. And so once you kind of have established yourself doing it, then finding a community is the next step. And there's a lot of them, and they don't really have to be a formal thing. You can just find a few people who like to meditate and do it that way. But just I would say just for the initial, it's just you can find the instructions on how to do it and just do it. It's very easy. Do
you have those instructions in your book? Do you talk?
I don't know if they're in this book. They're definitely on my blog. There's a little thing, hardcorezen.info, where you can just go, and there's a little spot there that says how to do Zazen. It's over on one side of the page. So there's that, and I think in every book that I've written, I've included sort of, sometimes I do it stealthily, including the instructions of Zazen, so they're spread throughout the book rather than being in one spot. And I think that's what I did with this latest book, is kind of put it in there so you could kind of work it out yourself, which, people like puzzles, so maybe they'll do it that way.
Very cool. And then you also have a YouTube channel, Doubt Boy.
Is it Doubt Boy or is it Hardcore Zen? I'd have to look it up myself, but I think it's YouTube/Hardcore Zen.
Okay, all right, you have that one on here.
Okay, because there's the Doubt Boy one too, which is a nickname that I picked up when I was in Japan. It's kind of a silly thing, but if you just look me up, I put these YouTube videos up usually 2 or 3 a week. So if you just put my name into the YouTube search engine, you'll
find it that way.
One of them, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful information. And for our listeners who want to get a copy of your latest book, it's Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen. And then are all of your books available also? If they looked you up on Amazon, they can find all your other books as well?
Yeah, they're all on Amazon. Most of them are even available as audiobooks and ebooks. So, and of course, I'm a big fan of bookstores. I'm not doing this from my own apartment today, but if I was in my own apartment, there'd just be this wall of books behind me. So you can find them in bookstores too.
You can actually find them in physical bookstores as well.
Yeah, if you can find a physical bookstore in your town, go support them. That's what I say.
Yes, definitely. And they can also find information about you on your Facebook page, which is Brad Warner Hardcore Zen.
Yeah, that's right. And then the hardcorezen.info blog is everything sort of out of there.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much again for being a guest on the Power of Your Mind podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends. And once again, be sure to subscribe to the Power of Your Mind podcast if not already. We can be found as Hip Talk on all our social media accounts. So like us on Facebook, Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, subscribe on YouTube, and sign up for your free self-hypnosis video training course at hiptalk.com. Be sure to subscribe to the Power of Your Mind podcast, and you'll be instantly notified the moment the next podcast becomes available. Also, please be sure to leave a rating and a review to tell us how you're enjoying these episodes, and that way you're making a contribution toward others getting to share in this valuable information. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. You've been listening to the Power of Your Mind podcast, brought to you by hiptalk.com, Personal Growth Club, and HypnoCloud apps available at iTunes.